You know, it's hard to find time to write when you work full-time, are a parent, and have a bunch of other responsibilities. If only there was some secret to writing more in less time. Hey all, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Kelly. I'm a husband, a father, a volunteer, and a full-time software developer. On this channel, we talk about ways to make time for our friends, family, and our own creative passions. Today, we're continuing my series on earning a master's in English language and literature. While I don't have any secrets to share, I will tell you the tips and techniques I use to fit in 171 hours of thesis writing into an otherwise already busy schedule, including 3 weeks of which I wasn't able to write in a 12-week semester. If you're interested in seeing details of all the time that I tracked while writing my thesis, please check out the video linked above. But otherwise, let's just jump into the first tip that I have for you. Number 1 is set tight deadlines and make and keep commitments to yourself. Yes, for me, it was a 12-week semester, and that is a short time to write a full thesis. But at the same time, it's a long time to procrastinate and niggle over fine little details. As the adage goes, work expands to fill the time that you allot for it. So instead of a 12-week period, I set for myself a 9-week period, aiming to be done before the 9th week of my semester. I then broke this down into smaller, manageable chunks with smaller deadlines, such as this week, I'm gonna finish my section on the history and evolution of nostalgia. I also set myself daily or hourly commitments and then gave myself rewards if I completed them on time. For instance, I'm gonna do some focused writing right now, and if I finish this section within the hour, I'm gonna go get myself a coffee. Importantly though, when the hour's up, when you've reached the goal, be sure to reward yourself. Otherwise, you're just training your brain not to trust yourself. This stricter schedule turned out to be quite fortunate. Unbeknownst to me, a dear friend of mine was coming over from Denmark, and we got to spend a whole week together in New York City. If I hadn't completed my thesis a week earlier, a whole 4 weeks before it was due, then I would have been a lot more stressed out when hanging out with him. The biggest win for me was using a technique called time blocking. It's very simple, but is something that is often overlooked. Simply schedule time with yourself to work on your task. For me, it was my thesis. This ensures that you have time every day to work on your writing instead of just trying to fit it in whoever knows when. Nowadays, I do this in my calendaring app or in my daily planner the night beforehand. I not only schedule important tasks, such as writing a thesis or doing my day-to-day job, I also schedule meal times, bedtimes, and time off with my family to make sure that I keep those things that are most important to me. Otherwise, I might be tempted to work through lunch more often than not. When working on my thesis, time blocking wasn't as integrated into my daily routine as it is now, so what I did is I just set aside every morning from 6 to 9. That was time that I would work on my thesis. And that leads to the next tip. Create a routine. Sure, you can pick a random hour throughout the day and dedicate that towards working on your thesis, but it's much better if you set aside the same time every single day. Create a routine for yourself. This is the time where you are going to write. When we tell ourselves we want to spend an hour every day writing, it's easy to push it back until it never happens. When we tell ourselves, I'm going to write from 6 to 9 every morning at McDonald's, it's more concrete and therefore more actionable. That's more beneficial and more likely to happen. Which brings us to tip 4, finding an environment where you can focus on one task without being distracted. I've always worked from home and have an amazing home office. I mean, come on, it's orange, isn't this great? However, I've trained myself over the years that this is where I go to do my work. It's where I go to program, it's where I go to develop software, it's where I go to work on the computer. It's not where I go to write. That's why every morning I try to get out of the house for a bit. I go to the local coffee shop and sit down there, relax, decompress, write in my journal a bit, and do a little reading. That worked great for my research semester. I could sit there on the sofa, I could read a book, I could take notes. It wasn't going to work well for my thesis semester. You see, it's a social environment, and so I had friends there. I'd already set the expectation that, I could be free, I could put down the book for a bit, I could chat. For the thesis writing semester, I really wanted to focus and be disciplined and work on this one task writing without being disturbed. Therefore, I settled on the local McDonald's. I know, it's kind of, boring? Weird? Whatever. But you know what? I went to McDonald's to write, and if I was at McDonald's, I was writing. That was it. End of story. Besides an actual location though, try to find other environmental cues to trigger the writing process. For me, it was putting on my headphones and listening to Time Out by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. I listened to that album over 70 times during the writing semester. These last 3 techniques combined into the powerhouse of me finding time and getting writing done in my busy schedule. Time blocking, routine, and environmental cues. Every morning from 6 to 9, I'd be at the same exact table at McDonald's, writing while listening to the Dave Brubeck Quartet. Next up, eat that frog. No matter where you are in your writing process, there's always one next task which you are dreading above all else. Do that first. As Brian Tracy says, if the first thing you do every morning is eat a live frog, you can go through the day with the satisfaction of knowing that that is probably the worst thing that is going to happen to you that day. For me, most often it's introductions. Whether it's the overall thesis introduction, sectional introductions, or even the first line of a paragraph. I hate introductions. I dread writing them. I know I'll end up rewriting them later, but I feel that I don't make good progress until they're done. They give me a trajectory on which I can begin the rest of the process. Lots of people recommend writing them at the end, and I understand that. And I'll go back and revisit them and often completely rewrite them, but for me, writing them at the beginning is a real powerhouse move. It gets me going. But I hate it. By eating that frog early in the morning, getting that done in my writing process as soon as possible, the rest of the stuff that I have to work on that day will be so much more enjoyable. All of us have areas in our life where we throw tons of time for little to no benefit. I call these black holes. They will just keep on taking all the time and attention that you throw at them. Black holes can be anything for anyone. But commonly, they're social media because they're deliberately designed to draw our attention and to keep us engaged. If you want to get a lot of writing done in a short period of time, see if these black holes are something that you can completely fast from for that time period. If you're not willing to do that, at least be intentional with them. See if you can change your usage somehow to make them more beneficial to you. I have lots of black holes in my life, but the biggest two while writing my thesis were podcasts and Twitter. So while writing my thesis, I just set a rule for myself. I would only listen to podcasts while I was exercising. The harder of these two was Twitter. I love Twitter. I find it both entertaining as well as useful, but I fall victim to it just as much as anybody else. Perhaps more so as I'm a bit of a Twitter completionist. I want to read everything from the people I follow. When beginning my thesis, I knew this was going to be a problem. I knew I spent a great deal of time on Twitter, and I'd rather spend that time working my thesis, because if I didn't work on the thesis, I knew I'd have to sacrifice other areas of my life, like time with my friends or family. I still wanted to use Twitter, but I need to find a better way of doing it. One where I would be in control and I wouldn't be tempted to just spend hours and hours on it. My solution to this ended up being Twitter lists. This change in usage immediately dropped how much time I was spending on Twitter without reducing my enjoyment or increasing my FOMO. If you're interested, next week's video is going to be about how I use Twitter in such a way that I keep all of the enjoyment but eliminate its control over my flow. It'll be linked above when it's done. Finally, the last one, and the one that is most often overlooked. Take time off to relax and let your mind and body recover. It's often in these free moments when you're doing other activities that your brain is at the most creative. You need to give it a break so that it can combine and solve problems for you in the background without you actively working on it. While I'm not always successful, I always try to take off completely on Sundays to spend with my family. Almost every time I did, I had fully formed thoughts or ideas coming to my head relating to my thesis without any prompting. Because of this, I always carried a notebook and a pen so that I could quickly jot down inspirations or even a couple of paragraphs that I could later incorporate into my thesis. I'd love to hear from you. What tips and techniques do you use while writing to get more done? Please share in the comments down below. There's still more to come in this series. When they're available, they'll show up in the playlist linked above. If you enjoyed this content or found it helpful, I'd love if you stuck around and support me as I get this channel going. So please like this video, subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and until then, see you next time.